Hey everyone. On this episode, I want to talk about something I've been noticing for a while, but it's become especially loud this week. The US just carried out airstrikes on Iran, and within hours, TikTok was flooded with videos screaming about World War III, reinstated drafts, and nuclear fallout. And while I understand where the fear is coming from, I think it's important to take a step back a moment. I'm not gonna lie, I feel like TikTok is becoming to Zillennials what Fox News and CNN are to boomers and Gen X. That is, a fear distribution machine. But instead of anchors and news tickers, we have trending audios and chaotic green screens and influencers speaking with total certainty, even when they have no clue what they're talking about. And the algorithm rewards it. That's what we're breaking down today. So let's get into it. All right, what actually happened on June 21st, 2025? As I'm recording this, it is 9:20 p.m., 6/21/25, and for the record, by the time this is out, we will most likely have more information and updates on what is taking place in the world, and I certainly hope that I am not going to eat my words because I don't want, war, and I don't want the worst things to happen. But I still think it's incredibly important to stress how necessary it is in this day and age to let yourself live moment by moment and not constantly in a possible future fed to you by algorithms. So on June 21st, the US launched a series of targeted airstrikes on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. These were described as surgical strikes. That is, something that is aimed specifically with the intent on completing a clear goal. One thing I would like you to understand as I go on with this episode is I am not pro-war. I am not pro-US. I am not pro-military. I completely understand the verbiage that is used by Trump and the White House to essentially lie to the American people. So don't listen to me here as some pro-conservative or moderate even. I'm just trying to rationalize here before I let my mind sink into anxiety. So we had 3 surgical strikes aimed specifically at these uranium enrichment sites. Trump claimed that the strikes were meant as a deterrent and not an act of war. So let's get that out of the way. I've seen tons of TikTok videos about the US just declared war. No, we did not. We did not declare war. That is a clickbait title. If you take the words from Trump's own mouth, which, again, I know isn't worth much, but is still significant when you consider that words, especially on the world stage, hold a ton of weight. So Trump called these strikes a deterrent and not an act of war. And as of now, Iran's response has been cautious. There's been no full-scale retaliation, no declared war. Intelligence analysts from groups like the International Crisis Group and reporting from The Guardian and Wall Street Journal confirm that regional actors, including Russia, the EU, and Gulf countries, are all urging restraint. Oftentimes, what we are fed through the algorithm is this domino effect, right? Iran is attacked. Boom. Russia's at war, China's at war, Pakistan's at war. Clearly, it's not that simple. What we are witnessing right now is not that obvious. But why does it feel like we're on the edge of total annihilation? Well, simply put, it has to do with fear. During the early 2000s, cable news networks made fear profitable. I don't know if you are old enough to remember this, but there were constant terror alert levels on Fox News. On CNN, there was round-the-clock countdowns during war coverage. It wasn't just information. It was essentially engagement farming. And TikTok does the exact same thing. But it's almost worse because it's faster, it's more emotional, and it's far more personal. You see, the algorithm doesn't care about accuracy. You could look this up. I think there's an alarming statistic that was released recently talking about the misinformation regarding psychological facts, like therapy facts, mental health facts, just not being right. And these are all propagated by the biggest, most influential accounts on social media. Again, the algorithm doesn't care about accuracy. It cares about interaction. And you see, fear makes people comment, makes them repost and share, keeps their eyes on that screen. And that makes creators, yes, even well meaning creators, incentivized to exaggerate. Think about how the app works. And this isn't just exclusive to TikTok, this is also Instagram as well. You're scrolling, whether through Reels or your Explore feed, Discovery feed, whatever you call it on TikTok. And suddenly, some teenager is yelling at you that the draft is coming back. Or some 20-year-old has a serious face on why this is the end. Someone green screens a fake map of nuclear fallout. People start crying on camera about how they just know we're going to war. And all of this feels real. It feels urgent. And before you know it, you're spiraling. Because TikTok and Instagram make every crisis feel personalized. Do you remember how you felt when Russia invaded Ukraine? I know how I felt. I thought for sure I was going to war. I remember watching, reading minute by minute, sifting through comments to see if there was going to be any nuclear strikes, reading Russia's response to the West to stay out of it unless they want, hellfire. There was a lot of saber rattling, and I remember being filled with fear. Now, hear me out. I'm not trying to downplay conflicts such as what's going on in Ukraine or in Africa. These are all real serious conflicts. But are you really thinking about any of them now to the same degree that you were buried in as those events broke out? You have every right to empathize, to be worried, to lament the atrocities, these horrors in the world. But I want to stress again that you were never, ever created with the ability to understand everything all at once. That is to say, you are not omniscient. You are not omnipresent. Your mind can literally not understand the scope of violence and suffering that is taking place on any given day in any given moment. And so apps like TikTok and Instagram profit off of what we call fear baiting. Fear baiting happens when creators lean into the emotional weight of a crisis without checking facts. And that's the kind of stuff that the algorithm just eats up. There's hardly any editing process. There's hardly any fact checking, just vibes. The nonprofit group First Draft found in 2023 that TikTok was one of the top platforms for spreading misinformation during crisis. And yes, that's including COVID-19, along with what we just talked about, Ukraine's invasion, and even natural disasters. Misinformation on TikTok is especially dangerous because of how emotional and aesthetic it is. If somebody is crying on camera or using trending sad music, we are going to subconsciously believe them. And in the last 48 hours alone, we've seen fake conscription orders, out of context missile videos from completely different years, misattributed military footage from video games even, which is wild to think about. What you are watching on screen, you don't even know if it's from last night, from today, from this month. Sometimes it's from a conflict years ago. And so that does something to your nervous system. What happens is that your nervous system becomes flooded with this kind of content, and you start to feel like the world is ending every week. Even if you know better intellectually, your body still processes the panic. You see the headline, that clickbait caption, and before your brain even understands logically, your body is reacting. It's called limbic hijacking. That's when your emotional brain overrides your rational brain in response to perceived danger. And it's insanely exhausting. This isn't just a TikTok problem, it's an attention economy problem. But TikTok and Instagram are optimized for speed, emotion, and amplification. They're perfect platforms for fear baiting. So what do we do? What do we do with this information? Well, I think the first thing that we should do always is pause. When you see a fear-inducing video, ask yourself, is this coming from a place of insight or panic? I would even go as far as to say, don't even watch. But if you must watch, I think the next thing you should do is verify. Is this an actual conflict reporter? Is this person a real scholar? Are they a journalist on the ground? There are sites out there that fact check constantly. Have them on bookmark. But really, if you can restrain yourself, I think it is so important to interrupt the loop. Take a break from doom scrolling. Re-regulate your body before diving into the next video. And you know what that gives you ample time to do? Conversate, communicate, talk about it. Help your friends pause too. Not in a condescending way, but just as a reminder that not everything trending is true. It is so important for our minds and body, especially during this day and age, to stay grounded. Regardless of what conflict happens, protest happens, major event happens, always, always have in the back of your head that the people in power are going to want you confused. They are going to want you overstimulated. They are going to want you distracted. Because when you have a large amount of people who are confused, overstimulated, and distracted, then you have a large group of people that are insanely easy to manipulate. That's why there is nothing more dangerous to a government than a clear-headed and educated individual. Because that's when we start asking better questions. That's when we start thinking more before we react. And look, I know it's scary out there. Believe me, there is an undercurrent of anxiety in my mind. But I refuse to be ruled by it until those declarations happen, until those threats and those fears are at our doorstep. I'm going to focus on the moment, on what I can do to prepare, on what I can do to educate, on what I can do to dismantle these oppressive structures and systems in place that are meant to keep us in fear. So don't hear me as somebody downplaying the evil in the world. You cannot be an effective fighter for freedom unless you are calm, level-headed, and educated. And I know that is hard in a loud world and with platforms like TikTok, CNN, Fox News, X, whatever, that make that noise even louder. But I just want you to know that you don't have to give all of your attention to fear. So stay curious, stay calm, and I'll see you in the next episode.